Welcome to the Paperless office call hosted by Virginio Basilet. My name is Bob, the event manager. Now, during the presentation, your lines remain on listen only. If you require assistance at any time, please key *0 on your telephone, and an operator will be happy to assist. You may submit web questions throughout the presentation by clicking on the Q&A feature. Type your questions and send to all panelists, and these will be addressed in the Q&A session. I'd like to advise the parties the conference is being recorded. And now, I'd like to hand over to Virginio. Please go ahead.
Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to the presentation. My name is, as Bob said, my name is Virginio Basilet. I'm VP of Professional Services in North America for Tikit, which I think most of you probably know of us. We're a professional services and software company based out of the UK, but we have a presence in North America. We specialize in time capture, in marketing systems, and document management implementations. The purpose of this presentation really is about the digital matter, or making the DMS the matter of a file. I know that it was promoted as the paperless office, but the paperless office, I think, is a term that has been used for a long time, but really doesn't exist. We'll always have paper, and we'll talk more about this. But really, it's about getting to a state where there's less and less paper in your office, and really creating a digital matter that is managed through your DMS, and being that is the best place to tackle the paper, the issues around paper, and we'll go through this in a bit detail. So the object of the presentation really is to provide participants with a simple blueprint for starting down the path of a digital file of record. So we want to be able to get away from maintaining paper as an official record, or something that we're storing, because whether it's documents, whether it's communications, whether it's correspondence, whether it's anything to do with client files that right now that traditionally have been held in paper, we want to make sure that becomes now part of a digital matter, and how to manage that process. What we aren't going to talk about are how to convert paper into digital. I think there's a lot of solutions out there. This is not the basis of the presentation, but really more about how do we transition from an office that relies on paper to an office that really, or a firm that has an onus on creating one digital matter file, and that becomes the matter file of record. So, I used to work in law firms many years ago, and we were talking about paperless 25 years ago, and it really is hard to get away from paper and to get into a matter file, a digital matter. And the reason because of that is that there hasn't really been a way to really encompass all the digital files under one silo or one area, and that has caused a lot of disjointed systems. It has also created data that is available in different areas. So before we start talking about that, I just want to maybe set the stage of where we are today in terms of the new reality of the workplace. So from our understanding and from some of the surveys, 50% of the larger firms are in various stages of moving paper to digital. And by that, I mean significant amount of work has been done to get away from the paper as a matter of record and to the digital. More importantly, the majority of data that's being housed in firms right now has been created in the last 2 years. So we've seen an exponential increase on how much data is flowing in and out of your organization. Even in law firms, we're seeing 4 more times the amount of people that are working remotely. And this is an impact also because obviously paper is a hindrance for people working remotely. having access to that information. So we're seeing more and more people working remotely, even in law firms, for a variety of reasons. But the important part of this is that remote workers are expecting the same level of service, whether they're inside or outside of the office. As I said before, there's an exponential increase of the data flowing in and out of your organization. People, the knowledge workers are moving vast amount of data in and out of the office, and that creates a lot of stresses to IT, creates a lot of stresses to firms in terms of protecting that data, making sure the encryption levels, being able to service your clients, collaborate with your clients. All of this is some of the biggest stresses that firms are experiencing right now, how to collaborate and service their clients with the amount of data that is flowing in and out of the organization. And what we're starting to see also is that a lot of the IT groups have a hard time now meeting the business demands. And that a lot of it has to do with the amount of storage that needs to be maintained for the data that firms are using, the security component, the encryption, the firewalls, protecting that data has become more and more difficult for the IT groups to handle within the current environment. Just a bit more on this. A few years, 15 years, 10 years ago, whatever, people were happy to receive email correspondence with clients. Now firms and lawyers, younger lawyers, are looking for other applications to remove emails. I just, even internally at our firm, at our organization, we're starting to transition to more of a messaging platform as opposed to an email platform internally, but also with our clients. People don't want to, have that email clutter all the time, and this is also impacting because you're creating another level of another level of client interaction. That data, whether it's in messaging, whether it's in chats, needs to be protected and needs to be part of the matter record. People, separate now work from location. You've got to be able to render services to your clients, whether you're in the office, outside the office, but also within the constraints of security, and also the constraints of the availability of what you need to provide that service to your client. Security is, again, crucial in what we're experiencing with our clients. Security before was you'd leave the day, you'd lock your cabinets, lock your office. Now, the onus is on data, and because the onus is on data, protecting that data because of encryption, the least you have access to, the better it is to do that job. In other words, you've got to make sure that your access levels are set to the level that you need to do your job, but not exceeding that. You can't have people that have general access to all data within the firm. You need to be able to control that access. Change is really quickly these days, and so a firm needs to be able to provide agile responses to clients' requirements, but also in technology, how the internal, the lawyers are what they're expecting to be able to have at their hands. And finally, data protection is the biggest threat to firms these days, and having an encryption level, having physical security has become one of the areas, and this impacts obviously the matter file, because what used to be paper, which was mostly paper records, were protected by locks and physical security. Now you have to look at levels of encryption, access controls, logs of dynamic logs of who's using what within the firms, just because it's data leaking, and data security has become a very important consideration in protecting the client record. So so where to start is an important question, and people have been asking themselves this question for a very long time, and obviously there's been a lot of work that's been done in this industry. But one of the issues is that, it's where does this data belong, or how do you access this data? So I went back and did some research, and through another organization, there were surveys that were done, and out of the firms that were surveyed, 100% of the firms surveyed wanted the DMS to be the official matter file. So people want this functionality. The problem is that 84% of those firms still relied on paper for some part of the official matter file. And on top of that, 55% of the lawyers still preferred to work with paper. So this obviously creates this connection between what's best and what really is what's best for the firm and what people want to use at a certain point. And it's building that process of getting to that DMS that's the key to this presentation, but to also what you should be looking at. Leveraging your DMS and slowly starting to build this matter of record. This change can't happen overnight, but it happens over time, and that's by focusing on the DMS and looking at all the components that you could bring into the DMS so that you can create this matter of record. And over time, the dependency on paper will go away. So let's begin with some basics statements. Paper files are still present all over firms. I don't think any firm will say that there's no paper left in the firms. The question is, how is that paper used, and why is it being used, and is it part of the matter of the record of matter? Because you still have paper, there are two main forms of storage. So you have your cabinets and you have your digital storage. Now, a lot of firms have done a lot of work in creating digital copies of internal documents, but this also requires a different form of storage, different form of processing. And that's really, that's where we get to the problem where firms tend to use a combination of both, which is possibly the worst case scenario, in the sense that you have to have so many different processes because you have paper records that require, obviously, storage area, which includes, obviously cabinets, real estate. It requires different access controls, locks. It requires different retention policies. It requires the use of external services to, a lot of firms have off-site storage of these documents. It's very costly to maintain that paper. And it doesn't give you some of the benefits of the digital storage, obviously. Digital storage presents other issues. So what we tend to see is different applications that store different silos of data. Each silo, and we'll talk more about that in a minute, but each silo requires specific attention to different processes, different applications. It creates a bunch of disjointed silos of data that need to be maintained. It starts getting into costly storage. And so this is where you have two different systems. Nothing is really consolidated into one, and it doesn't lend itself to bring to users or for the lawyers to effectively transition to one method to handle their matter record. So just a bit more detail on that. Digital security and physical security require different management processes, as I just alluded to. And usually there's policy documents that govern both all these processes. But it's also very heavy on management. It's very heavy for firms to maintain these two different systems. That being said, we understand also that digital searching is much easier and thorough than paper. Just think about trying to share something that is on paper, collaborating with your fellow knowledge workers or your clients with paper becomes more and more difficult, and has been for years, obviously. Again, firms tend to have multiple information silos that increase the cost and risk. So every silo requires different processes, it has its own cost associated with it, and has its own risk in protecting that data. More importantly, it doesn't create an environment where people have easy access to all that information. So the idea, again, obviously, is like working towards bridging that gap of bringing those silos together, bringing all that data under one, regulatory or management of that data, which is your DMS. And we'll talk. We'll get into that, is how the DMS can now facilitate all this process. So let's talk about the advantages of, and I think everybody knows knows some part of this, but the advantages of less paper. Obviously, less paper would boost productivity on so many levels, right? Because you have easy access to that information. It's easy to collaborate, easy to share, easy to get access to, less costly. Enhances collaboration, which is an important part of the new workplace that we were discussing before. Being able to collaborate internally and externally is it's not a benefit anymore, it's a requirement. You need to be able to be agile in servicing your clients, and that entails having access to that information, being able to be mobile, being able to to always have that information available to you, whether you're in the office, outside the office, and that's key to starting to move away from the paper. The cost of paper is relatively cheap in the end, right? But internally, but all the managing that paper, it becomes very expensive, and because not only is it the cost of the actual service, but it's the time that it's required sometimes to get access to information. And time, obviously, is very expensive in law firms. Lawyer time is the most expensive cost of a firm. Minimizing that time that it takes for the knowledge worker to get access to the information they require is very important. And of course, paper is very difficult to search. Finally, there's also the question of the environment, and this is something that is that firms or younger workers at firms, this is very important, that that the systems that the firms support are environmentally conscious. So what are these information silos? Well, there's really three of them. There's paper, all the digital, and external collaboration. So we're trying now to bring within this equation not only the data that's produced internally and stored internally, but also anything that you use for external collaboration, which is messaging with your clients, and shared spaces that you collaborate with firms on, sharing documents and creating workflow within your DMS. So in all these items here, they're all managed separately and have a cost associated with them. Firms all have part of these within their firms. They all use external collaboration tools, like whether it's Workshare, Dropbox. They all use messaging app. The younger lawyers are all using messaging to communicate internally with their coworkers, but also starting more and more with their clients. These are expectations that they are faced with now. Reality in terms of communication, that we need to make sure that we bring that information in one of the silos or within what we manage as our official matter file. So, what are the downfalls of these having multiple information silos? Just to go back, well, each requires different storage method and unique management. And this is very costly for firms, but it also creates issues in terms of data protection. The more of these processes that you have, the more of these silos you have, and the more of these internal policy manuals that you have, the more you need to maintain access controls and security requirements, the more risk there are. But just because you're creating more exposure to the outside and to the data itself. Access is specific to the information cell, and this is very important because access controls are as we alluded to before, is something that is becoming more and more critical in firms in terms of protecting the data is who gave access. And when you have multiple information silos, each come with their own access controls. And maintaining that becomes expensive again. It becomes, it becomes management heavy. It requires people to administer and to maintain. Also, what many of you are experiencing also, when you have these different information silos, you've got to be able to, secure and to be able to go through audits to ensure security and compliance. And that is also becoming more and more costly for firms. So when you have these different data silos, they become critical when you go through audits that clients regularly now are requesting from their firms. And bringing that all into one management tool obviously greatly facilitates participating in these audits. So let's make the case for the digital matter file of record, the DMS. So we know that there are hard costs associated with paper, understanding the cost of paper, the real estate, the physical security, disaster recovery costs, hard to share, and fees associated with moving and retiring, but also the loss of productivity because people that are moving paper around are less efficient in their work. It's just a process that requires more time to move the paper around, to use it, to mark it up, for somebody else to then take that markup and work, and create the digital version of it, whatever the case may be. It's just a much more expensive process. But there's also the hard and soft costs of maintaining multiple silos of digital data. So we have all this digital data internal in these firms, and people don't understand. People sometimes think that that most of the data comes from outside the firm. 70% of data is actually generated with, and we'll go over that in a minute, but 70% of data is actually generated internally within the firms, and making sure that all that data is then housed under one management tool, your DMS, is crucial then to ensuring that you're moving towards a digital matter file of record. So again, multiple storage, technology that's associated with large storage and interfaces for users to learn. That's costly. Multiple access controls, difficult for end users to navigate. So they might have a search engine for let's say for precedence, and then they have a email search engine for something else, and then they have to go on another area to look at litigation files. All of these things require different interfaces, create less efficiencies, and these are the hard and soft costs of maintaining multiple silos of data. Before we get into the more specific of the DMS, let's just lay some groundwork for addressing what are today's expectations for a firm in terms of being able to provide services through technology to their clients and to their users. So client files and data needs to be under one document management tool to address security and compliance audits. If you don't, obviously, it becomes much more difficult to pass these security audits. It's costly to go through these audits, as some of you already you obviously know. And so that being able to provide the encryption levels and the access controls is imperative going through these. There's also the aspect that your younger attorneys or lawyers that are coming into the firm, they're expecting technology to work, to be easier, and to work the way that it works in their outside of the work life. Being able to access information when they need it, how they need it, from a mobile phone, being able to communicate the way that they're used to communicating is essential for the new working knowledge worker. And clients expect firms to use newer technology to provide better services, more accessibility, more collaboration in a modern user interface. I think the more the clients require access to your systems, and what you show them or your technology capabilities, I think says a lot about the firms in the end sometimes. So this is something that clients are expecting firms to get to where technology is today. So let's look at the benefits of having your DMS, and not only a DMS, but a DMS that's stored in the cloud, because the cloud is becoming more and more important. It doesn't have to be, it's not a requirement, let's say, but it does facilitate, and you'll see in a minute what I'm getting to, but when you have your DMS as the digital matter of record, it's one system to audit, one system to grant access and to encrypt, one system to maintain, one system for searching, one system for collaboration, and one system to access anywhere and on any device. This kind of starts checking off all the boxes now that you can transition from your paper to a digital matter file. And then paper really is becoming more and more of a convenience, but not of an important matter, important record to the firm. And I think part of that is it doesn't need to be necessarily a cloud-based system, but this is where we're seeing, this is where technology is heading. And it's because that these cloud-based systems offer a level of security, encryption, accessibility that are not necessarily available on an on-prem. They could be, I'm not saying that they need to be, but it does facilitate. It checks more boxes. So what does the new digital workspace look like? The core user experience, it's the complete digital file, right? So this is, documents, emails, messaging, other pieces of information. We'll get to them in a second here. All coming under the DNS, all being shared through the DNS, all being accessed through the DNS, all being secured through the DNS. And that allows us to really think about transitioning away from paper as much as we can. The other thing that's very important is that it's persistent and consistent. So all of a sudden you have a work environment where you don't have to learn multiple interfaces. You don't have to understand the quirks of different systems. Everything becomes, whether you're filing an email, whether you're working, collaborating with your client, whether you're, saving a document, it's all the same user experience. Whether you're in the office or outside the office, again, always the same user experience. You learn, you become a master of that interface, and therefore you become more productive. This is the key to enhancing, productivity for your knowledge worker, where they could trust that the DNS becomes their matter, they're obviously where everything comes together, and the more they become proficient in how to search and how to, collaborate with their clients, how to provide additional services, because everything is integrated in the DNS. That's when you start seeing the level of productivity rise amongst the knowledge worker. And that is for me, that's a critical component of providing a service to the lawyers that enhances their work experience, because you're actually delivering value to their daily work requirements. Again, this available where you are, not where the office is becoming more and more prevalent. If you're not thinking about that, you should be in the next 3 to 5 years, where you do need to move to a more of a cloud-based system. We're seeing it across our product platforms that people are starting to really consider cloud-based systems as something that is beneficial on so many levels to the firms. And we could, if somebody wants to have a discussion on that with me, please, I'm more than happy to talk through this. Again, the idea also is that it's connected to everything within the firm, the DMS. So the DMS becomes like the heart of the internal, computing services that you provide to your knowledge workers, and that is that everything consolidates there. So what does it mean? What it means is that there are some extraordinary financial. It has some real financial impact if you want to make your DMS matter file of record and paper just a convenience. Again, paper is not going away, but you need to make it. It needs to become less important within the firm, and slowly over time, it will become less and less prevalent. So some of the strategies that you can employ to get you there. We're coming up to almost the end, so thank you for your attention. I'll be taking questions in a minute. But so some of the strategies: attack paper at the door, which really represents about 30% of your documents and data. So if you could start thinking about how do you attack paper coming in through boxes and getting that digitized, that is one of the strategies that you should have in your forecast. Again, bring that into your, and we'll see in a minute how, but that, create that process, but make sure that it's part of your DMS. Understand that 70% of the other 70% of data is already in an electronic format within the firm and needs to be managed by the DMS, one silo, thus eliminating the reflex to print. So consolidating that data under the DMS, all data that's produced internally, is essential to creating this environment. Make sure that the whole firm is invested in creating and maintaining the digital matter. This is not just a management issue or a lawyer issue. It really is about the whole firm being focused on creating this digital and maintaining this digital name and respecting the data security requirements along with it. It's also important that that the knowledge worker is not spending too much time, creating this digital, file. You want the knowledge workers or the lawyers to consume this, but everybody else in the firm needs to be focused on making sure that there's no data that is outside of the DMS. Obviously, get the most out of your DMS. Find out all the areas where it can, and see which. If you're looking for a DMS vendor, look at where all the capabilities that your DMS can offer you, whether it's a messaging with clients, whether it's shared spaces, whether it's a cloud version. These are all things that should be part of your selection or part of what you want out of your DMS. And obviously, know your firm culture. And see where you fit along that stage. If you're a heavily paper user, you understand that is not going to go away quickly, but it's a transition over time. So figuring out your firm culture, where you stand on that spectrum, is important to set the strategy of how to get to where you want to go to. It's always going to be a bit slower, but you could start building creating the right foundation, create the right foundation, create the right tools to start that implementation. Understanding and utilizing current technology trends is important also in creating that strategy. Obviously, I alluded to how the cloud is important on so many levels, and I'm not going to say one's more important than the other, but the level of encryption, the level of security of that data is becoming. I think it's the number one concern of all firms in how to protect client data. And like in any other massive change management process, you have to create that buy-in through communication by showing the benefits that we've discussed today, by showing the cost analysis of what it costs the firm to stay on paper or to have multiple silos or don't have all the data being under one DMS. Okay. So this is my last slide before I take questions. So your DMS is the foundation, as I said, and it should consolidate all the following. and these are just examples of some of the, but internally produced document, Word, Excel, PowerPoints, that should all be obviously part of your DMS. Emails, scanned documents, in PDF or some kind of visual format needs to be part of your DMS. Messaging apps, Teams, things like WhatsApp now is becoming more and more prevalent in firms. That has to be part of maintaining within that data. Shared spaces for client collaboration, and things like closing books, where firms now are using their DMS to manage the closing of their deals. These all have tremendous impact and cost benefits to the firm. So, Bob, at this point, thank you. I'm ready to take some questions. Thank you for everybody's attention.
Thank you. So your question and answer session will now begin. If you wish to ask a question, please key star, then 1 on your telephone. And then if you decide to withdraw your question, simply key star 2. All questions will be answered in the order received, and you'll be advised when to ask your question, and all other lines to remain on listen only. Alternatively, you may submit a question on the WebEx, and to do this, click on the Q&A feature, and then type your question, and then click Send to all panelists. So just to remind you, to ask a question on the phone, please key star, then 1 on your telephone. Thank you. So just advising, no questions on the WebEx just for the moment, no questions on the audio. So again, just remind you to ask a question on the phone, it's star, then 1 on your telephone, and then on the WebEx, just click on the Q&A feature, and then type your question, and then click Send to all panelists. Thank you. So just another reminder to ask a question on the phone, just key star, then 1 on your telephone. Thank you. And we do have a question on the phone, and it's coming from the line of Ari Odenoki. Please go ahead, you're live in the call.
I just missed the very beginning of Virginia's presentation, and I'm trying to understand what is the product that you guys are talking about, the DMS product. I expect that this is a Tikit product of some kind, but what is the name of the product, and how can we learn more about it?
Thank you. Well, just to let you know, this is a Taloma education presentation, so it's really not product specific. We're a vendor of NetDocuments, but NetDocuments is not the only vendor of DMS that could satisfy, the environment that I was discussing. But yes, we're looking. There's about 3 or 4 major document management systems that are available. We're a partner. We're a platinum partner of NetDocuments, so obviously, we know a bit more about. But we've also worked with iManage in the past. So we're really talking about, that level of document management systems. But this is not product specific. This presentation was more of an educational session.
I appreciate it, and I found the session very informative. But I'm at a point where I'm looking at some of those solutions, and I would love some advice on what products are available, and so that I can go and shop around. NetDocuments is one product you mentioned. Are you able to mention some other ones that are on the market that do the same thing?
Yes, I mean, I think the main competitor to NetDocuments is iManage. And there's also some other, there's OpenText, that there's still some OpenText out there, companies. I would say World Docs is another one. So there's like 4 or 5 main legal centric DMS out there.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you. There's no further questions in the queue just for the moment. So again, just to remind you to ask a question on the phone, please key star then 1 on your telephone. And then just to also remind you on the WebEx, just click on the Q&A feature and then type your question and then click send to all panelists. Thank you. We have no questions on the WebEx and no further questions on the audio. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. We'll end it at this point.
Thank you. So that concludes your conference call for today. You may now disconnect, and thank you for joining.